Black History at the Avery Research Center opening soon.
Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Aaisha Haykal, and I am the manager of archival services at the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture in South Carolina and Charleston. And we are a proud sponsor of the Black Ink Book Festival. And we are glad to be with you this morning and to bring you this conversation around researching African diasporic history and culture for your writing. And I'm pleased to be the moderator for today's session, and we have a great panel that will be speaking with you this morning. A few housekeeping rules. So for Q&A, we request that you use the Q&A question chat function. That is the third icon in your sidebar, and that is where we're going to be able to pull your questions to respond, for the panelists to respond to. Use the normal chat function to just say greetings and to give props to our panelists. And that is kind of how we're going to go through the morning. Reminder, the session is being recorded and it is being live streamed. And if you missed part of it, you can come back later today and see the instant replay. And without further ado, I will have our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Georgette Mayo.
Let me make sure that I'm on. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for attending our session. I'm Georgette Mayo. I'm the processing archivist at the Avery Research Center. And I've been there. I'm celebrating 16 years as of this month, so I'm really excited about that. So I'm glad that you have attended.
Thanks, Georgette. Kaia.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kaia Alderson, and I am the author of Sisters in Arms, if you can see it okay. And it's a novel about the Black female experience in the Women's Army Corps during World War II. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Kaia. And Piper?
Hello, everyone. I'm Piper Huguley, and I am a historical author of historical romance and historical fiction. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. So we'll start with Ms. Georgette Mayo. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Avery Research Center and if any authors have come through Avery to do research?
Okay, the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture collects, preserves, and promotes the unique history and culture of the African diaspora, but we specifically focus on the South Carolina Low Country, Charleston, Beaufort, and several parts of there within. In regards to authors, we have a plethora of authors that do historic research. I can't think of anybody. I can't think of actual names of the authors, but I can talk about the actual topics that they've written about. The Ellen and William Craft collection that we holds a numerous information in regards to the story, a true life story of a couple that escaped slavery, and the way that they did it was very ingenious, considering the woman that Ellen pretended she was a white man that could not read or write, and that her servant, which was her husband William, helped her as being a servant. So there's been numerous historical novels written about her, about the couple, and also children's stories. Also, we've had authors writing about the Gullah tradition of making sweetgrass baskets. Philip Simmons, who was a craftsman that did the ironwork in and around Charleston and South Carolina, and he's really been known internationally. So those are just a couple of things that I could think of offhand.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This question is for both Piper and Kaia. When did you start writing historical fiction, and why?
Well, our stories need to be told, so somebody got to do it. And I'm a professor, and I was of English, and of course, to get students into the literature, I had to start telling stories about the history. And I realized after a time back at about 2010-ish, I was spending a lot of time doing that. And so I began to think of what way could I convey this history to these children so that they could begin to understand just how remarkable our history is. And it finally smacked me upside my head after quite a long lifetime that I really should be writing historical fiction. So I began to write historical romance, and I first published that in 2014. And this year is when I will make my debut in writing historical fiction about the life of Anne Lowe, who, as many people may not know, was the Black woman who designed Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress, amongst many other wonderful designs that she has made. So, yeah, to answer that question, it's been about 11 years now.
Similarly, I've been actually writing historical pieces probably for the last 10 years. It took me many years before that even to have the nerve to think that, I could write this, that anybody else would want to see it. A story I often tell about Sisters in Arms is I've been actually working on it for 10 years, and it's only in the last 3 years that part of the reason why it took me so long is because whenever I would get stuck, I was like, nobody wants to read this anyway, and it was just for me. And then when finally an editor said, somebody write me this book, I could say, oh, I've actually been working on it. Somebody else does want to read it. And so now you have a book called Sisters in Arms. But as Piper said, yes, somebody needs to do the history. I think I can say in Piper's case as well as mine, I actually love going through lists of collections in archives online for fun, just to get ideas. Incidentally, with the Avery collection, one of my cousins actually made a contribution there. And then after she passed, I was just researching, looking her up, and her donation popped up, and that's how I learned my great great grandmother's maiden name, and from there it just opened up a whole world. So I was mentioning before, I have a couple stories now set in Charleston based on the family history I was even able to find, because when everybody was with us, they would say bits and pieces, but I didn't have the insight that I do now to ask the questions I needed to ask. So another reason why I'm writing this stuff.
Thank you so much, Kaia. And relating to your book, Sisters in Arms, can you tell us about how the story came to be, how they became interested in the story, and then what was your most helpful resource as you were doing your research?
Sisters in Arms started with this picture. Hopefully you guys can see it. It is a picture of the 688 Postal Battalion in a parade in France. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh my goodness, those are Black women. Looks like U.S. uniforms. That's the 1940s, and that looks like Europe. What's going on? So it all started with the picture I saw on Twitter. And from there, I just did a basic Google search of Black women, World War II, and I think Army, not expecting to get anything, but actually it opened up very quickly, found out the name of the unit, where they came from, what they were doing there, their stories. And very quickly, I did like that Wikipedia research, and then wrote this whole beautiful story set in 1943, Christmas in New York, soldier girl instead of soldier boy, last night in town before shipping off, and got all my historical facts wrong, because there was only one unit of all of Black women to go over during the war, and they went over in 1945. So all the wonderful details about Christmas in New York in 1943 I had to go out of the window. So I was more serious about my research after that, and I came across this book, which is called One Woman's Army, written by Charity Adams Early. She was the commanding officer of the 688, and this is her memoir of her time in the Women's Army Corps, starting with the very first officers training class. There were 39 actually Black women in that class who were officers, and it talks about everything, at least from her perspective, up until the time that she went over to Europe and came back. So the other initial resource that I would say was very helpful. I actually think I read this one first. It's called To Serve My Country, To Serve My Race. It's by Brenda L. Moore. And I want to say it's her dissertation. It's academic, but it isn't completely academic reading, if you will. It's very interesting, and she basically would go to their reunions and interviewed the in the 80s when a lot more of them are alive, because I think only about 6 or 7 of them are still alive right now, and talked to them about their experiences and talked about their backgrounds, how they wound up enlisting in the Army and things like that. So those were my jumping off points, and then from there, as I was coming up with the story, it would generate my questions, because if you've read it, you know, like I have a black male who is in his prime, but he's not in uniform. And I had to figure out, were there any black men who were like that? Why wasn't he in uniform? Things like that. And I was able to luckily find a memoir for Truman Gibson and things like that. So the work generated the questions and led me where I needed to go to do the research. Did I answer all your questions?
Yes, thank you. Next question is for Piper. Can you talk to us a little bit about why it's important to have Black romance novels?
Well, as I say, if it wasn't for Black romance, we would not be here. So I'm just putting it out there. All right. I know for me, my parents were married 48 years until my mother passed, and it was quite the Black romance, honey. Um, I need to write it down too, but it goes all the way back. I mean, that's who we had. We had each other. So that's what got me started into looking at historical Black romance. And of course, our wonderful keynote speaker, Beverly Jenkins, had been doing a mighty work for a very long time. And she broke a path for those of us who want to tell historical Black romance stories. And I just noted in my own little corner something that I thought needed to be told in terms of Black historical romance at HBCUs. And that's what kind of got me started with my first series, Home to Milford College, which is a created, made up HBCU, because a lot of people they start looking for it. Like, don't look for it; it's only in my head. But that's what got me started with Black romance per se, in terms of making that particular case.
Thank you so much. A question from Miss Mayo, Georgette Mayo. Talk a little bit about the research process. So what should researchers expect when they are doing archival or library research?
Okay, that's a general question. Do you mean at Avery or at other archives? Because I can do both. I have answers for both.
Both, please.
Okay. Well, since we are in the time of Rona, as I like to refer to it, always check the website of the archive that you're going to. We always ask that of our researchers if they're doing research at Avery. We have a plethora of information in regards to making an appointment. We only see researchers when making an appointment at Avery. We prefer to do, if you're out of town, we prefer that we meet virtually via a Zoom chat. That way you can ask the archivist exactly what you think that you might want to see. Because, and I say you think you might want to see, because the archivist hopefully would have some things that you might not have on your radar that you hadn't thought of, but would fit the bill or complement what you want to write about. Again, ask a lot of questions. Hopefully the archivist, when you have a Zoom chat or a telephone chat, in fact, pick their brain. That's what we're here for. I'm fortunate that not only do I process collections, I create what I say. A lot of times when we get collections as an archivist, they're not in any kind of order. And my job as a processing archivist is to put them in some kind of logical order to help a researcher find what they're looking for. I'm fortunate enough to also to work as a reference archivist. So I know the front end and the back end of a collection, and I can hopefully make suggestions in regards to what you're seeking to find. When you actually get to the physical place of an archive, you've made the appointment, you've talked to the archivist, they pulled the collection for you. It is very simple. We do have protocols, again, with COVID, or even if it wasn't COVID. We ask that you only bring your laptop. You work only in pencil and paper if you don't have a laptop, because a lot of times our collections are one of a kind. You don't want to damage anything with pen. And we do have lockers. Most archives do have lockers, so your possessions will be safe. Again, everything should be all ready in regards to the collections being pulled that you want. So we like to do that ahead of time before you actually get there. Also, things that you can do outside of the archive is, since we are part of the College of Charleston, we are part of a consortium that has the Low Country Digital Library, which is a valuable resource. We have photographs, documents, ephemera of a lot of our major collections, like the Septima Poinsett Clark collection. We have some of our sweetgrass baskets photographed on there. The works of Philip Simmons, the people that I had mentioned before in my prior question. And you can, if you need an actual photograph, you can contact us in regards to getting the actual image off of the Low Country Digital Library. And many of the academic institutions, they do have some kind of digital library that you can tap into and do your research at home, in the comfort of your home, and nationally, internationally. So those are I think, excellent resources to utilize.
Thank you so much. That's perfect. Before we were talking about travel and needing to get experience the physicality of a location. Kaia and Piper, have you traveled to kind of get immersed in the world that you're trying to create? Piper?
Go ahead and answer that, Kaia. We went.
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
on now.
Actually, Piper went with me when I went to Iowa to the Fort Des Moines Museum, and that is the location where they trained the Women's Army Corps, that very first class of officers they trained. So we were able to drive around, kind of figure out just from architecture. I'm not an expert, but eyeballing it, you're like, okay, that looks like that was there in the 40s. That's definitely now, things like that. So we were able to like figure out where the train station was that they arrived and drive the street that would have taken them to the base. So you can kind of talk, if that came up in the story, and it's in there, I think, we could, I could talk about it intelligently. And then when we went to the actual museum, which was fascinating, it's actually closed, and they actually had to open it for us. This was before COVID, but we were able, half the museum is dedicated to the Black men who trained as medical officers in World War I. Didn't know that till I got there. And then the other half is for the women who trained there during World War II. So it was, it was educational because we both learned something new. And then also we could, they had on display their shoes that were issued, their uniforms, summer and winter wear. What else? We were able to go and look downstairs in the archives. He was just flipping through, like, this is the stuff we had, and the menu popped up. I'm like, I need a picture of that. So I know that they ate meatloaf and mashed potatoes and potato salad and things. So the potato salad scene that's in the book, happened because of that. The other place I went was New York in 2019. It was the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And in upstate New York, in Rockland County, Camp Shanks is where basically 75% of everybody who participated in D-Day went through Camp Shanks when they shipped out. It's where the 6888 shipped out. So I wasn't able to go to the actual site because I think there's only like one or two things, but the local historical society had all of the camp's newspapers. So she was able to pull, and she pulled the newspapers. I didn't even think that they had it. She pulled them 2 weeks before, when we knew they were there, and 2 weeks after. So I knew what entertainment was coming through. I knew what the train schedule was. I knew what the bus schedule was in and out of New York City up to Camp Shanks. I knew what they were eating. I knew that the pie shop had opened about the week of or the week prior to them arriving. So that was like the big thing that made it into the book. When I was there with my dad, we drove around. So we know that the soldiers basically marched from Camp Shanks to the pier to get on the boats. So we drove those roads that they would have walked all winding around and, the mile and a half. And I'm just sitting there like they had everything on their back. So I was able to kind of visualize that and what would this have felt like, after marching a mile. While I was in New York, I also went to Harlem. I grew up in New Jersey, so I've been to Harlem before, but it'd been a minute. So I just walked the streets. I knew what trains, what the locations were. So I kind of visited those spots. I just walked it just to soak up the vibe of Harlem so that I could at least get that first part of the book while they're there, right or kind of accurate or what I imagined it to be. So that was pretty cool. Oh, and then on my next book, I actually in October, when things had calmed down a little bit, I went up to Cooperstown to the Baseball Hall of Fame to do some research up there, which was really, really cool.
Yeah, I've done a fair bit of traveling in terms of New York with where Ann Lowe lived for a good portion of her life. I've been to rural Alabama, which is where she has she was born and was brought up for the first portion of her life in Montgomery. I made a side trip to Washington, D.C. because a previous biographer of hers had worked on a thesis of her life for her thesis, a biography. And I went to George Washington University to see if I could look at it. This was pre-pandemic, and I should have known better, but I unfortunately had not put in my request in enough time, so I didn't get to look at it. But because I had been kind and inquired and etc., they went ahead and sent it to me anyway. So this is one of the benefits of when you're doing this kind of research with librarians and archivists and all that other kind of stuff, to be nice because you never know where that might lead. So, yeah, I've done a fair amount of traveling here in the United States for several of my projects.
Thank you so much. Before I ask the next question, let you know we will be opening we will allow the attendees to ask questions of our panelists, and so please use the Q&A icon, which is in the third icon on your sidebar, and that is the way we can get your question answered by the audience, by the panelists. And so with about 6 minutes, we'll begin that part of the session, but we have a few more questions for the panelists. So I guess the question is for all three of you, what are you currently reading and what books are you excited about?
I am in the middle of Personal Library by Victoria Christopher Murray and Marie Benedict. So that's exciting. It kind of touches on some themes on my next project. I'm excited for everybody to read Piper's book. I read an advance copy and she did an amazing job on that. And also in February, Carolina Built by Kiana Alexander is coming out. And it is about a woman who was born enslaved and by the year 1900 was the richest woman in her town in North Carolina. She was a real estate magnate, Josephine Leary. Josephine Leary. I'm sorry about the baker. So I'm excited for everybody to read that. And was the question also, what was I working on? I'm in the middle of drafting my next book, which working title is called In a League of Her Own. And it is about the only woman currently who is inducted in the Baseball Hall of Fame, Effa Manley. She was co-owner of a Negro League team. And prior to that, she was a social justice, civil rights activist in Harlem. She spearheaded the event on 125th Street where in the early 30s, you could not get a job. You could shop all you want, but they would not hire you on the sales floor. And she's the one that spearheaded that campaign to get Black saleswomen on the floor. I think that's everything.
I'm going to follow up with after Kaila's because the other thing that we do at the Avery, and I'm co-moderator of the Dr. Consuelo Francis Reading Circle, and our September book was The Personal Librarian. And I found it a fascinating book. I had no idea about Belle DaCosta Green's life. I knew about her father, who was a noted librarian and attorney that stemmed from South Carolina. He worked at the South Caroliniana at the University of South Carolina, but I did not know about his daughter because she passed. And I'm so intrigued by her story after, reading The Personal Librarian. And she was the librarian for J.P. Morgan, the multimillionaire during the turn of the century or the 20th century. So I'm reading The Illuminated Life, Belle DaCosta Green's Journey from Prejudice to Privilege by Heidi and Aaisha. And again, the reason why you really didn't know about her is because she passed. So has a really fascinating life. So it's a thick book, but I'm enjoying actually reading the biography.
And one thing I didn't mention is the reason why I find her story so interesting is Effa Manley, who I'm working on now, could have passed if she wanted to, and no one knows for sure if she was Black or mixed or whatever, but she chose to live as a Black woman openly in the 1930s and 40s. So it's been really interesting learning about Belle DaCosta Green while being knee deep into Effa's life.
I read a fair amount of historical fiction for market purposes, but also because people ask me to give blurbs for their upcoming books. So I've read a fair amount of that. Like Carolina Built, which Kaia mentioned, is a really great book coming out next month. I hope people go to get it. In the Face of the Sun by Denny Bryce is a historical fiction, a Black historical fiction that is coming out in April, as well as Take My Hand by Dolan Perkins, and Sister Mother Warrior that's coming out in July. So there are not a lot of these books, Black historical fiction books. There have not been, but over these couple of years, and I know about some that are upcoming in 2023, there is a veritable avalanche of them coming compared to the ones that were on one hand. You could count the numbers of Black historical fiction books by Black authors. I want to make sure to reinforce and add that. There are Black historical fiction books that have not been written by Black authors, and that's something, but there's a particular aspect of the experience that these books that I've mentioned, the ones that came out last year, along with Island Queen and other ones that I would highly recommend to people to read, advocate, lift up, talk about, etc. In terms of that. So I've also been reading a fair amount of biography for my upcoming project, which has not yet been officially announced, but was accepted. But it's tentatively called American Daughters. That is about the unknown friendship between Alice Roosevelt, the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt, and Portia Washington, the daughter of Booker T. Washington. So I've been reading fair amount of I don't know if that the glare you can see that. That's Portia's book. And then there's Allison's book, in terms of reading about their lives and the ways in which an interracial friendship was not permitted to be developed, but that these two women went ahead and pursued that relationship between the two of them as friends over 50 years. Interesting enough, I know Victoria Christopher Murray's next project with Marie Benedict is going to be about the friendship between Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune. So I'm thinking 2023, there's going to be a thing with that going on. At least I hope so.
I'm not alone in saying I'm so excited to read those. So I'm looking. My pocketbooks are open. There's a question about for Piper and Kaia about the book publishing process. We have a few aspiring or emerging authors in the audience, I'm sure. And so, can you talk about the book publishing industry, about getting your book out on a contract, and independent versus mainstream publications?
I think it's about getting out there, investigating all sorts of things. I know there are people, some people who don't care about social media, but like Kaia, the opportunity to write Ann Lowe's book came on Twitter. So
Same.
I don't know what to say, but these things do help these days in terms of discovery. To pick your favorite and pursue it hard. Get to know people, get to talk to people, connect, engage. Networking is still it's still a big deal. I published my first contemporary romance this past July with Hallmark Publishing, and that opportunity would not have come about if I had not gotten to know the editor several years in advance and had actually gone through a certain number of rejections of ideas until she agreed to publish this one. So that's my tip in terms of the sort of the publishing process per se. Um, Given the events that happened in 2020, as the Vanessa Riley would say, there is a crack and they're pulling Black authors through it right now. It's true. And that is to say, not to say it's not because we don't deserve it. It's because we most certainly do deserve it. And the numbers, as I had indicated, in terms of our own voices telling these stories prior to a certain point, was humiliatingly low, and they know it. So if you have an idea, if you have something that you would like uh, to do, now is the time to strike.
Co-signing on that. Yes, our stories are hot right now. We've been waiting in the wings. Like I said, I was working on my book for the longest, convinced no one wants to read this. It was going to be a historical romance novella. I was going to self-publish it. If 5 people bought it, great. I wrote it and move on, and it turned into something else. So I would say trust your gut. If you feel you have a story, even if it's not out there, there is a lot of emphasis on comps. And saying, okay, my book is like this or similar to that or same vibe as that. And that's hard for us, but for you coming up in the next year, so it should be a little bit easier. I think with mine, it was like my comps were the Alice Network and Hidden Figures, which if you've read both of those, I was like, what? And if you read Sisters in Arms, like, what? But, I had to go. People kind of got where I was going from. And once I had my little log line together. In my case, I did not have a traditional experience because my book wasn't even finished. Finish your book, number one. Finish it. Go through it. But because I was in the middle of writing it, when an editor on Twitter said, "Hey, somebody write me this book," and posted the same picture I showed you, and luckily, I didn't see it at first, but luckily my friends did, and they knew I was working on a World War II book. They're like, "Kaia, you need to respond," and it worked out for me. I actually had a book deal before I had an agent, again, backwards. I was then scrambling to find somebody when I got the offer. I also had the foresight in that situation when I got the offer to say, not commit to anything, but I'm very excited. I need to go get an agent because my agent was then able to negotiate. Once I got an agent, she was able to negotiate for things that I didn't know you could negotiate for. While you're in your process of writing your book and researching it, find your crew, find your people to bounce ideas off of, to critique partners, and also to keep your spirits up, because this business is tough regardless of what your skin color is or what your background is, but you are going to run into things where you need your cheerleaders. Piper is one of those for me in our group. You're going to need somebody who maybe had a different experience or different insight, and you're like, hey, you need to do this, because I had that it was at a point where the editor was like, just send me what you have. And I was still convinced that this isn't good enough. It was a mess, y'all. This was my experience is backwards. And one of my friends in our group, she was like, if you don't hit send on that bleep bleep thing, I will come and get you. So I finally just hit send because I was being bodily threatened, and it worked out. So trust your gut.
It's called friendly encouragement.
Okay. But I've done the same to Piper too. So.
Yes.
But trust your gut, finish your story, believe in your story, and just be ready for opportunity, because you could. I think my situation is definitely where it was lucky, but when they said preparation and opportunity is where you got the luck, that definitely happened. So just go with it. And even if it takes you 10 years, I can tell you stories about writing this book in itself. I was doing my final revision edits the week of the insurrection and the inauguration last year. So I can talk to you about, when the world is literally falling apart around you. I can talk about writing through that. Also with the story, make sure, trust your story, make sure it's something you love, because I read Sisters in Arms about 6 times within 1 month, critically and editing and things like that. I've done other books, novellas, shorter things, digital only, where I've read those books 10 times back to back to back, and I still loved it even more each time. So don't pick anything just because you think it's in vogue and I'm going to do that, because if you're not feeling it, you're going to get tired of it pretty quickly. Or it's something you have to research deeply or ask these little oddball questions where you fall down a rabbit hole for an hour to get the answer, it's not going to work, and it's going to come through in your writing.
I know we're going to get on to the Q&A. I just wanted to interject something about agents. It's better to not have an agent than to go with just anybody. And one of the most valuable pieces of advice I got starting out on this journey was to have the understanding that you are the boss. The agent works for you. It is not the other way around. If you have someone who is acting like they are God's gift and you are lucky to kiss the hem of their garment or whatever, hard pass, move on. There are many, 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 many agents out there that you do not have to settle. And we Black people, I think we tend to do this too often because we know there are corners of our life, etc., where we're not being accepted. And oh my God, somebody wants to read my stuff. I'm telling you, you are the boss. Do not settle ever in terms of an agent. That is someone who is representing you out there in the world. If they are not acting right, if they're not treating you right, bye-bye. That's it. So, and I say this as someone who was agent poisoned for years. I have had agents take their cards, put it into their purse, and run away from me, literally, because they did not want to talk about books dealing with our history back in the 2014s and 15s and stuff. Things was mighty rough. But that person finally showed up and ended up coming to me, believe it or not, as opposed to me searching for them. It can happen, but I'm telling you, with that agent, be very, very careful. I'm done preaching.
And piggybacking off that note, if you do get an offer without representation, again, just be like, I'm very excited and I need somebody to represent me on my behalf. Even if you don't believe in agents, at the very least, you need to have a lawyer who knows the entertainment industry, specifically publishing, not the cousins, friends, whoever that does personal injury, because it's completely different. Like I said, my agent knew to ask for certain things I didn't even know were negotiable, that I'd always been told, nope, that's not negotiable. She was able to work out things or ask for things that I didn't even know was a thing to ask for. So even at the very least, an entertainment lawyer who knows publishing, they'll at least be able to say, you need to ask for this, things like that, if you insist on negotiating it yourself. But have some, and I'm talking about if you're going with traditional publishing and the big houses, but even with the smaller ones. I've heard horror stories. I've heard people who are locked in for the rest of their lives with only one publisher because they didn't know the language, things like that. And so they had to basically give up their writing careers or go to completely different genres and things like that. So yes, you can do your research, but also find professionals to protect you who work for you.
Thank you all. We're now going to have questions come to the stage. And so this is one question came from the chat, and so I just put it into the Q&A. I think Kaia about comps. What are comps?
Comps are comparative titles to your work. So like I said, I pitched the comp of of Hidden Figures because the Hidden Figures book talked about women in the space program, and my Hidden Figures were women who were in the Women's Army Corps during World War II or female soldiers during World War II. So it helps kind of people who aren't familiar with the story very quickly just wrap their minds about what you're trying to do.
Thank you. Georgette, you mentioned the LCDL or the library. How do you get access to it? Are you on mute? Georgette, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just talking and talking. Anyway, I will go ahead and put the link in the chat along with our website link. So hopefully that will help.
Thank you.
And thank you for your interest.
How do you find an agent, and do you recommend getting an agent? I guess that's for Kaia and Piper.
You find agents by doing your research. And I know everyone's like, do your research. Doing your research means attending literary events like this in person. There's even a pitch opportunity here. That's one way to meet agents and editors. Even if it's somebody who's not on your radar or you don't get who you picked, it's good to have a conversation with them because you might just in talking to them find out, oh, wait, this is the right person for me. By attending events, you also meet other writers who know of other agents and things like that. Go online. If you are on Twitter, you want to follow hashtag MSWL, which stands for manuscript wish list. And that's where editors and agents post topics and things that they're interested in, so you can get a sense of that. You can also get a sense of their personalities if they're the type to post on social media a lot. There are books out there that have lists of agents, so you can get a sense of who represents what, because you don't want to send, it's a waste of your time, your funds, and that person's time if you're writing historical fiction and you're sending it to someone who only deals with science fiction and fantasy, if it's not fantasy elements in your book. When you see these high rejection rates, that's about half of what they reject. It's just the wrong person. Make sure you have the right person's name. Make sure you spell it correctly. In my case, my agent's name is Kevin, but she's a woman. So, it doesn't bother her when she gets Mr. So-and-so, but that's one little nicety that you can be on top of. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, Kaia is absolutely right. And just to add to what I said, you really do want to get a sense of that person's personality first. I have known many big time agents or whatever, and they were my so-called dream agent, whatever. And then we met in person, and I just knew it wasn't going to work. So you do have to have that sense of that you're going to be able to work with this person, etc. And I think Rhonda has just put up in the chat in terms of the pitch sessions that are here. These are opportunities you always want to take advantage of. If you see that someone is representing in your particular area, talk to them. It may work out, it may not work out, but yeah, you want to do that. My agent is pitching, he is taking pitches here. So if you want to meet the woman who was crazy enough to take me on, it's Emily Sylvan Kim.
I would also say when you're meeting that person and you're vibing and you're like, oh, this can be my homegirl or whatever, that is a good thing, but it isn't necessarily the thing you should base that answer on. Because when I was talking to agents, I had one, we were chatting it up, Kiki, all of that. And we're still good friends to this day, but she was up front. She's like, I don't really represent women's fiction. I really do more of this. And it was just like, okay, that's not, after talking to other agents who did represent what I had, I could see where, yes, we get along and things like that. And we're cool. And every time we see each other, it's like, hey girl. But in terms of the business portion of what I needed and what I was trying to accomplish, I had to go with somebody else.
That's right. It's business. It is several things over it, and it's business. But yeah, some of these people, I think, didn't understand where I was coming from. So.
Publicists are expensive. If you're going to hire your own personal publicist, just be prepared. Don't get the sticker shock when they may throw out a 5-digit number with commas, and they can't guarantee results. They're working their connections and their relationships to get your face and your product out there. I don't have a personal publicist. I have one through my publisher. She did the thing, because I've had things happen, and the marketing department, they both did their thing in terms of my book, because my book showed up in places it was never even on my radar or I even thought possible. So even the in-house ones, are good, and they do their thing, and they can make big things happen. So don't think that you need, I just need a publicist. If you are going to hire somebody on your own, you need to have a goal and an objective. I need you to work this because I want to do a radio tour, or I want to do a bookstore tour, or things like that. Have something specific, not just I want to have a publicist just to have a publicist, because it's really expensive.
Yeah.
The first step in the process is finish your book. Finish it and polish it and make sure it's ready to go. At that point is when you should have your critique group or somebody who knows books to look at it. It's one thing, it's great to have your friends and family say, oh, this was great and I enjoyed it. But it's another for somebody else who may not have that as close connection to you to look at it critically, like, yes, this is fabulous, but what you have here, but this character is inconsistent in this spot and that needs to be fixed. Or have you considered that? You want to have somebody who's able to dig into it a little bit, or if something isn't perfect, that's able to constructively tell you this is what's wrong and this needs a little bit more work and these are some things to consider. Once you have it in good, I could say good enough shape, then I would say that's when you start looking into, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to self-publish it, then you need to be educated about that process, the cost, the outlets. Are you going to do just digital? Are you going to do both print, things like that? If you're going to go the traditional route, then that's when you have to start querying agents. How do you write a query letter? How do you make your list of potential agents, things like that, and know where I think I want to have it published with this house. But you're going to have that conversation with your agent once you're there.
Thank you so much. This will be our last question for this session. We encourage you to go to the Black Ink Lounge after this session to talk more with our panelists and other attendees of Black Ink. The question is regarding potential historical inaccuracies within one's book, putting questioning around Black people like Bridgerton, right? Like there was no Black people during that time, right? So how do we, put more diversity into historical fiction that people don't want to question?
Child, don't get me started about Bridgerton, because we're going to be here a whole nother time. Anyway.
That's another panel.
That's a whole nother thing.
Mm-hmm.
I typed in response to this particular question about the author's note, which in historical fiction is now an accepted practice regarding the way in which you talk about the research that you did and the places where you took fictitious license with your story. And that's what you do to CYA. We all know what CYA means. Times of Coven, y'all. You had that author's note back there to explain that. One of the phrases that I despise the most is historical accuracy. People say that phrase in order to stop you from telling your story because they do not wish to take into their mindset how much of history has been whitewashed and pointed towards the particular point of view that includes the stories they want to hear, not the stories that should have been told, and the ways in which we have been erased out of history. Anlo was called society's best kept secret. This is why nobody knows that this Black woman designed Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress, because they erased her on purpose from that accomplishment and all of her other accomplishments.
Jackie did it herself.
Historically accurate, yeah. Historically accurate means to their history, not to the complete views of history. So when people start throwing that stuff out, and they will, you're ready with your sources. That's what the author's note is for, where you list that stuff, where you talk about the research that you did, so they'll shut up.
On that same vein, with my particular book, I already knew that folks were going to come with me. And like I said, as part of my process, I had to go back and basically reorient myself to what actually happened versus, the fantasy story I had in my head. As part of my process, I went back one day. I just sat with all my notes, with my outline, with all the books that I had, and I made a chronological outline of everything that happened in real life, what that source was. And then on top of that, I put my story beats in time. So I knew that I was being historically accurate, making sure that people didn't know things before they were supposed to know it. And, it's just, okay, this section of the book, this section of the book. And then when I was doing like another, I think my second revision passed, I was able to go through in the section of the book, what was in the news. One thing I caught very late was when in my book, I had them finding out FDR died the afternoon that he died, which is impossible because he died at 3:00 in the afternoon in Georgia, East Coast time. And my girls were in England at the time, which is 5 or 6 hours ahead. They didn't even, and we didn't have internet or email or things like that. So I had to go back, and the King of England didn't even know until midnight their time. So then I was able to backtrack. But in my outline, I went back and I put the link where I found it. I've had people question, if you've read my book, the ending of the book and that little nice twist at the end was too good to be true and too happy-go-lucky. I have the source. I can refer them probably within 20 minutes with the article, the page, and the date, documenting that too good to be true thing actually happened. I've had people say, oh, this book isn't accurate. It's too whatever. And I can ask them. One guy on Twitter was like, and I was like, oh, really? Which part of the book? I'd be happy to discuss my sources with you. And he had to delete his tweet because he had nothing to say to that. So I would just say the onus, we have to do that as people writing about African American history, Black history, because most of these people saying that don't even know. I've gotten so many letters, not even challenging me, just saying I had no idea. And these are like the big World War II history buffs and things like that. And they generally want to know, oh, I want to learn more. And just like I'm able to say, here's the book. If you look in my book, there's a very long list of resources in my author's note, because I know people are going to challenge me and keep asking me the same questions. And I'm like, number one, I can say buy the book, but it's in the back of the book. It's there. If you want to go back and say that's not true or this person is wrong, then we have something to talk about. But Don't let that stop your story. Just keep track of your sources. And they're even in my copy edits and things like that, where in-house people, the person that got to copy edit me was really good. And, we were having back and forths about things, and it was like, okay, I want to do this. This is another source, things like that. But again, I just added it to my outline. That way, it gives you that sense of confidence. I even told Piper, I'm ready for them to come and bring it. I'm ready for them.
Mm-hmm. And they shut up when you have all of that. But it's just really, I have found over the years, when they start talking about that historical accuracy, the thing that shuts up about 90% of them, so you don't even have to go down the way in which Kaia is prepared to go down, is whose history. Then they shut up. That'll shut them up because they know that there has been a whole lot of whitewashing. And I just want to attend something to something that somebody's talking about in the chat in terms of documenting. There is a genre called alternate history, and it's perfectly fine to write stories in that vein. They're very fascinating stories, like what if Henry the Eighth's son Edward had lived much longer, or something like that. They're perfectly fine stories to write in terms of alternative history, and they're fascinating. But what we're talking about here is historical fiction. So I just want to make that distinction in terms of that.
Wow, such amazing presentations. I could be here all day with you, the three of you. So many questions, but we will close the session out. I will give you each opportunity to say some closing remarks and say how people can find you online, and I encourage everyone to go to the lounge. The next session will be at 3 o'clock. If you have pitch sessions, it will be at 1 o'clock. Look at the agenda for information. So, Ms. Georgette Mayo.
Greetings again. Oh, I'm supposed to provide my my info on how to contact me?
Yeah, or any other upcoming events.
Oh, well, I have to make my shameless plug for the Dr. Consuela Francis Reading Circle. We meet the third Thursday of every month. And this month, January the 20th, we are celebrating the great Zora Neale Hurston with a series of short stories. And let me look that book up really fast of what the book is.
That's so awesome. People don't read her short stories nearly enough. I'm so glad.
Hitting a straight stick with a crooked stick. So we would hope that you join us. We also feature guest authors, and I'm sort of hoping that I would love to invite Kaia and Piper to our sessions. We would love to read we would love to purchase your book. We would love to read your books. And we would love for you to be a guest speaker 1 month.
I would love it.
So we can talk about that.
Consuela, so I'd love to come. She was awesome.
An excuse to come to Charleston, yes.
Always.
That's the other thing, that we do it virtually, because that way we can accommodate, guest authors for wherever they're at.
But even I can do virtual and I can do in person. Yes, whenever.
Yes, always.
So I will put my email in the chat if you're interested in joining us for one or several sessions. We meet once a month. And I send out an email prior, several weeks prior, and it's also featured on our website. But yes, we'd love to have you as guests and as speakers.
Thank you. Kaia?
I put it in the chat, but you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Kaia Writes, KAIAWRITSES. I think I spelled that right, but I spelled it right in the chat. My website is www.kaiaalderson.com. And yeah, I'm out on Twitter all the time, hanging out and being ridiculous when I'm not writing.
And Piper?
Yes, Twitter is where I can be mostly found causing trouble, at Piper Huguley, PiperHuguley. Facebook, Piper G. Huguley. Instagram that I'm learning about, Piper_Huguley, and my website is piperhuguley.com.
Perfect, thank you. And do please follow the Avery Research Center as well. We're on Instagram as Avery Research Center and on Twitter as Avery Tweets. So you can stay up to date on all activities that we are doing, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much for attending.